It's well known that certain racial populations are more susceptible to certain types of diseases than others. It's well known, for example, that blacks are more susceptible to sickle cell anemia. It's well known that the American Indians were nearly wiped out by smallpox, influenza, and other diseases brought by Europeans because American Indians did not have immunity. The relationship between race and disease susceptibility presents a problem for those who insist that races do not exist biologically.
From a genetic or a biological standpoint, races do not exist.
So race deniers will typically take a pragmatic but blatantly inconsistent approach and acknowledge in effect that yes, there are biological reasons why certain racial populations are more susceptible to certain types of medical conditions than others. Now, a truly consistent race denier would insist that no attention be paid to racial genetics by doctors, surgeons, or drug companies.
When a physician sees a patient in his office, he's seen an individual. He's not seen a group.
Yeah.
And so I think that population thinking is not really that useful. And I feel that it's time to replace it with a model in which you don't have the persons, the 6 billion individuals in the world, are not structured in races, they're not structured in populations, but they are simply structured as 6 billion individuals.
Every human being is an individual, and any classification under which you group segments of the human population will still consist of individuals, including the effort to group all of human beings into some concept called humanity. All humans are individuals. All men are individuals. All women are individuals. All blacks are individuals. All dwarfs are individuals. All redheads are individuals. The fact that any classification of a subset of the human population reduces to individual members does not mean that the concepts for classification will just disappear. The race deniers suppose that by focusing on individuals they can make all classifications of individuals vanish into thin air.
Concepts such as race, they just vanish in thin air.
We seem to be getting these conflicting messages. One is, there's this evidence that race, as we know it, doesn't really, there's no scientific basis. But at the same time, studies continue to come out where they do group people racially.
The scientists, they have to let go of prejudices and previous ways of thinking, because if the questions are formulated with population thinking or with racial thinking, the answers will come with population thinking within the framework of population thinking and racial thinking.
So if medical researchers observe a correlation between race and heart disease, and if pharmaceutical researchers develop drugs to specifically target a particular race to improve members of that race's odds of survival, then they are guilty of prejudices. And this race denier, who has done none of this research himself, but prescribes in advance that there can be no correlation between race and susceptibility to heart disease or race and responsiveness to treatment of heart disease, this person who prescribes that there can be 0%, 0, 0, 0, and nothing more than 0 racial variation in terms of medical applications, this person accuses medicine of being prejudiced for trying to use information about race to help people.
The pharmaceutical industry that discovered now a new cash cow with these race-targeted drugs.
But say for doctors who are looking for easy indicators of susceptibilities to certain...
There are no easy indicators. They are using the wrong indicators of susceptibility. If they use so-called race, quote-unquote, or population. But if you switch model, then you're left with no indicators of susceptibility.
I say this race denier is simply being consistent and true to his principles. Race realists have different principles and take a different approach. They don't prescribe particular outcomes. They look at the evidence and draw conclusions from the evidence. Some race realists may be biased. Any person can be biased. But their biases are refuted by their own principles. When considering the question of to what extent does racial heritability explain the black-white gap in acquisition of heart disease, race realists take a look at the full context. They analyze both genetics and environment. They don't prescribe one particular causation as being more important than another. They don't insist that everything has to be genetic, nor do they insist that all disparities in all forms of health outcomes are necessarily related to genetics, but they are open to investigating it. On the other hand, the deniers insist before the investigation even begins that there can be any racial heritability component to any medical disparity. This is irrational, it is ideologically driven, it is non-scientific, and it should be rejected.